Okay, welcome to Progress Monitoring for Paraeducators. This session is going to look at focusing on the role of paraeducators in the progress monitoring process. My name is Deon Bates, and I'm one of the directors at KVEC within the Special Education Department.
And my name is Denny May. I'm a due process consultant here at KVEC.
Let's just talk a little bit about what progress monitoring is, what your role is, how we collect data, and then we're going to give some examples and some opportunities for you to practice. You have a really important role as a paraeducator in this process. Part of the work that we do in special education is that we look to see what students need based on their individual performance, and we try to then write a goal for that student in their IEP around what that targeted area is. And part of our job then in special education is to provide students some instruction around that area that they have a deficit in, and then we monitor to see how well they're doing along the way. So everybody has a really important role in collecting some data to see how well our students are doing. So Denny's going to talk a little bit then about what progress monitoring is.
Yes, and so on this slide, as you see, progress monitoring is basically just looking at the skills that the student may have a deficiency in or a gap, and we're going to look at those skills, and we're going to look at the after teaching the student, has the student made any progress on those particular skills or the outcomes that are expected when the measurable annual goal is written. And so ARC teams should regularly use this progress monitoring data. The backdrop for this is that it's required by law. We've learned a lot through case law that has taught us that not only do we have to have an IEP, but that we have to check to see that the teaching that we're doing is being effective. And your role as a paraeducator is to support that and to understand, that progress monitoring is an important piece, because we want to teach and we don't want to go for a long period of time and work with students and never check to see if they understand what it is we're working on. As of course, students with disabilities have some gaps. You're working along maybe in a regular classroom, and you've got certain standards that the student is expected to meet and have access to. And so after applying the specially designed instruction and the different methods and different delivery of instruction that special educators are employed to provide, then you would just make sure that you're supporting that. And a big part of that is testing the student, collecting that data, making sure that data is efficiently used and analyzed, and it helps to not only show us is the student making progress, but is the instruction that we're providing and supporting as a paraeducator, is it being effective? And so that is the big part of what progress monitoring is. So we're looking at analyzing data, we're looking at collecting that data. After we collect it, we analyze it, and then that impacts what we do as teachers and paraeducators. So the purpose of progress monitoring then determines that gaps are it helps to determine that the gaps that the students have, we're closing those gaps by providing the correct instruction. It informs the teacher's instructional decisions, provides legally required data for compliance, and it helps to inform us as to where the student is actually operating. Anytime, like let's say we were getting ready to go on vacation, Dion, and we know that there's a couple things we need to know. Where's our starting point and where's our ending point? Where are we headed? And so that's kind of what progress monitoring is in the present level. And we're looking at determining what the baseline is, what's the starting point for a student on their instructional level, and where are we hoping to get in the next year. And so then you're looking at annual goals, and are they being met, and are we providing access to the general curriculum? And then it also helps with student engagement. If we make them part of this process and inform them what we're doing and why we're doing it, it really helps for them to be engaged and take some ownership in their education. And then also, case law has taught us that we're to involve families in this whole process. They're informed that the student's making progress, and if they're not making progress, then we certainly are going to go back to the drawing board and look at our instruction and see what we can do differently for these students. That is all mandated by law. And so we can go on to the
And
next.
I like that
Yeah.
last bullet item there is talking about how we involve families in their student education and the progress. This helps us know when we progress monitor and we check little data points along the way that we don't wait till the end of the 6 weeks or into the 9 weeks before we know how well students are doing. So that's a good thing. And that way when we have ARC meetings or when we have parent meetings, that we can say, we know that this strategy or what we're doing with your student is working or it's not working, and we're able to really help families understand how they can help their kids at home too.
And in practical terms, around grade report time, typically educators, paraeducators, regular educators, special educators, administrators all get questions from parents regarding what's going on with the students. So if we're doing progress monitoring along the way and we're informed and we know where the students are operating, we know what's effective for the students based on the data, and the data supports our decisions that we make, then we've got good explanations for what's going on with the student within that classroom and within that IEP implementation process. So, Dion, this slide, it really has to do with collecting data and doing what we need to be doing for students. So one of the things that we have to do is we have to describe what their current operating level is. So a better word for that's baseline. So would you like to talk a little bit about baseline and what that means to you and your understanding of that as far as progress monitoring is concerned?
Absolutely. So what we are asked sometimes is we want to know where the baseline is. So really that is asking us to figure out where the kid is currently, what their independent performance level is or their functional performance level is. And we have to figure that out. We have to put it in a number or a way to calculate that in a way that we have a percentage or we have some data points or some tally marks or some way to calculate where their performance is at, because we have to have somewhere to start and then we've got to measure how they're doing along the way. So what baseline really is, it's kind of like taking an average. So we look at some scores. So we might, if they're having some trouble in reading, we might give them some reading passages and we let them read. And maybe if it's fluency, we're checking to see how many words they read correct per minute. Maybe if it's a comprehension, we're trying to see how many answers they can answer around that reading passage correctly. And we don't want to take just one glance at it, but we do this maybe 2 or 3 times, and then we average those together. And so that's really how we calculate baseline. It's the same thing as we're calculating a grade average. We may have 100 and a 90 and an 85, and we add those 3 scores together and then divide it by 3. That tells us what our grade point average. Well, this is the same thing we do for baseline. Whether it's reading, whether it's writing, math, we may let them solve 10 math problems and maybe do that 3 times, and then we take the average of that, and that tells us, what they can do at that time. We have to know where to start, and so baseline really just gives us that real fundamental area where this is the starting point and this is where we're going. And again, it helps us make a percentage or growth, because that's what we really have to know is, are we growing, and can we calculate that with some kind of quantifiable, some number.
And it's very important as we move through that we have data consistency. So whatever we start, whatever tool we use to gather baseline information on, let's say if we were looking at reading and how fluently a student, how many words they could read per minute, then we would want to use that throughout the data collection cycle and throughout the IEP cycle so that we're comparing apples to apples and we're not using different tools, because that would give us inconsistency in the data. We couldn't predict further if the student was making progress and if they were going to make that annual goal or going to meet that annual goal. So data consistency is very important. Using the same method of measurement is very important, and certainly, as you were looking at probes later in this training, you can see that you would want whatever you determine that baseline to be, you would want to continue to use that throughout the instructional time to gather the data that's going to make you make sound instructional decisions.
And you'll find that information when the ARC that we refer to, or the Admission and Release Committee, has a meeting, and they look at the students, how they're performing. They look at some of their testing data, they look at their academic performance data, they look at their grades, they look at lots of different things, write a goal, and in that goal they make that decision about what they look first to see where that student's independent level is at, and then they decide as a committee what they're going to use to measure that. So that will be something that the teacher and you can collaborate on, is what tools are we using to monitor that progress over time. And so you'll have some access to some of those tools, and so you can learn to score, how to administer those and how to score those, and then how to put those data points on. So you can see how beneficial that would be if you're collaborating with that teacher, because you have a lot of different students working at different levels, and it really takes all of us collaboratively and working together to do the best job we can to help kids.
Dion, there's also this element in the goal that talks about frequency of data being collected, how often we are going to collect that data. So we need consistency around that. So if a student misses a data point, we should try to make that up as soon as they get back in school, or for whatever reason, if they're out for being sick or whatever. So we need that consistency. We need the same tool used. We need the same amount of time to elapse. There's kind of like a sweet spot. Sometimes if you let it go too long, then the data is going to be skewed, and the effectiveness of what you're doing with the student is impacted. And we want to collect this data, and we want to check for understanding with our students often. Students with disabilities really need that, and so we certainly want to not neglect the fact that there needs to be consistency in the tools that we use. The instructional changes that we make are based on the data that we take, and so that certainly is huge. So, on this slide, there's a couple of things that we want to talk to you about. We need to know what's expected in the general curriculum. The standards kind of guide that, and you're a specialist in those standards. You've been through that many, many times with reading and math. And so, there's that bar set for if a student's in the 4th grade, where are they operating? Typically, if they're a student with a disability, they may be somewhat lower than that. And so we need to know what that is, and we need to be able to attack that through instruction to help the student get closer or close that gap like we talked about earlier. And so we talk about adverse impact lots of times. How is the disability causing this student to be behind in reading, to be behind or have a gap that's significant that we would need specially designed instruction? And so, I talk a lot to teachers in our trainings, and I say, what's special about what you're doing? So we need to be looking for alternative ways to provide the content, alternative ways to provide in our methods. What are we doing? If one way of teaching the student doesn't work, then the instructional assistant would aid us in helping to find and being consistent with that instruction in terms of the changes that we would make to provide for the student the specially designed instruction that's going to bring about the change. Now, if we're talking about analyzing the data, there's a couple of things a couple of key questions we need to answer. Is the student making progress, and are they going to meet their annual goal? And how do we know this? So you want to talk a little bit about how we would know, Dion, if you would?
Sure, yeah. So those are great questions, because that's really what we want to do with progress monitoring. Is not do we just want to collect that data, but we want to be able to put a data point on a graph or some kind of visual representation that says, okay, this is where they're at, and this is how we know that they're improving. Because we're going to look at things specific to what their disability is and what we're working on. So if it's reading fluency, we might look to see how many words they read correctly per minute. And we are expecting them to get better and better and better. So we're going to know, because if we, on Friday of this week, we take data on the number of words read correctly, and it's 82 words correct per minute. And then next week, we're going to work on some fluency. So we're going to practice some activities. We're going to do some special instruction for them and provide them some support, and then we're going to check again next Friday, maybe, for example, and we hope that they've grown in the words they read correct per minute. And so we're going to keep looking at those data points, and we're hoping that each time that we see that there's growth. So then we can go to a meeting. We can set in, a conference with the regular ed teacher and the special ed teacher. And when somebody asks that question, how do we know? We've got that data. We've got those little data points on there. We can say, okay, we use this reading passage, and this is how many words they read correct this week, and this is how many words they read correct next week. And then we're going to be able to look over 2 or 3 weeks, and we're going to say, oh, it is getting better. But if they're not getting better, what a good opportunity we have right then to change what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we use. That's how we know. We have it, we can prove it because we have the data to show that. Same thing if we're doing reading comprehension. And let's say we've been working with a student that's in the 5th grade and they're reading on the 2nd grade level. And we're using 2nd grade text to let them read independently and then answer some questions because we want to see if they comprehend it or if they got it. And so maybe they answered 4 out of 5. And then the next week they only answered 2 out of 5. And the week after that they only answered 2 out of 5. We know right then that probably whatever we're using, that strategy, and that would be a highly effective evidence-based strategy we would want to use, and you'll hear a lot of talk about that. But we know we got to know what we're using is working, and right then we know within 2 or 3 weeks that we better change. And you work with those children every day. You work with those students every day. You know how well they're doing. You know if you can see growth over time. But you also will see if you do this, if there's common mistakes they keep making. And it might be something simple that we can teach them a skill or a strategy, and they can correct it, and then they just take off. And so, again, your role as a paraeducator and how closely you work with those kids, you know the progress they're making and how, if they're kind of stuck, or that's when we know we need to change the instructional strategy, or we might need to do something different, or we might look at the, kind of what we're having them read.
Right.
And so the same thing for mathematics. We can work with them on some math problems. We teach them a skill or strategy, and then we check again. So that's how we know. We know because we've got a data point. We know if they've got 8 out of 10, or if they were only getting 4 out of 10 and 4 out of 10. But we have solid evidence, and that is our evidence.
And as a paraeducator, wrapping your head into this process is really, really important to help support, because you may have 7 or 8 students that you're needing to gather data from, so you can help and assist with that, and really knowing what the sweet spot is. You've got to give enough time for the instruction to have an impact and let the students practice and have those without taking a data point, but then also taking enough data points that the trend in that 9-week period or 6-week period is going to show you something. So you want to take data often enough that it's going to predict it, are we making progress? But also you want to allow enough time for the instruction to have an impact,
right,
so that the data is real and it says something. So as a paraeducator, you would want to to have your head wrapped in and to assist the teacher in taking those data points when they need to be taken and taking them consistently, and then analyze it and say, yes, the student's making progress. And we have some rules that govern that too. Of course, we won't go into that, but there's if the student's not making progress and they're well below the aim line in progress monitoring, then we would make an instructional change, or vice versa. If they're well above the aim line, then we would reduce some support maybe and make the goal a little more difficult.
Right.
Anyway, that is kind of what we do with analyzing the data to help us say, is the student making progress toward meeting that goal, and are they getting access to the curriculum?
Right.
And so then utilizing the data here, when you talk about progress monitoring, you want to look and see the previous goals. We want to look back to the previous goals. The teachers look back in the ARC meeting because we do an annual review. We look back and we utilize this data to help inform what we're going to do next. What's our next steps? What are the things that we need to be doing with this student? But now that goal may be much the same, but it may be at a little different instructional level. So we'll need to analyze that and then use that data to help predict and to kind of push us to where we're going to go next.
Absolutely.
And so certainly present levels have that element. We need to look at that data. We need to look at the progress monitoring from the previous goals. We need to make a decision. Hey, does this goal need to continue, or does this goal need to be changed or tweaked a little bit? Has the instructional level changed? And what do we need to be doing at this point? You know, when you're looking at kindergarten and first grade students in reading, you're a reading specialist. You know, it's one of those things where you're looking at letter identification. Maybe you're looking at how the students, you know, do they know what's, you know, what those letters and those sounds, what do they correspond to? And then as you move through, you start maybe looking at fluency and how a student can put those sounds together to make words, and how they can put those words together to make sentences. And then when you get on up, you know, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, you start looking at comprehension. So there's lots of things you have to do with the present level, and we need to know what they've done previously so that we'll know where to go next. So that's certainly a big part of it. Do you have anything to add here, Dion, in terms of
Just thinking about the present level. So we use that language, present level, but it really is where the student is presently, what their level is that they're presently functioning on or performing on.
Right.
So that's what really present level means, is what is their independent level or what's their functional level? Where are they at? And then how are we going to move them forward? So that's that's the only thing I just say is, you know, we use that language and we talk about those things, but that really is just exactly what it is. It's just where they're at right now and how we're going to move them, and that helps us to know how to move them forward.
Yes, and you know, we utilize the data by saying, okay, if this is not working, if this in particular strategy is not working, what can we do differently? It's our job to find what the special part of special education is. And so we help assist the teacher in finding those strategies that work with the students. And when we do those repetitions, we know that repetition and feedback allows the student additional practice. We know that students with disabilities need additional practice. So that's certainly a big part of it. And that helps to inform the present level, and it helps to inform the teacher of what we should be doing next. So again, this is kind of a repeat here a little bit, but you know, when we collect baseline data, we know that we're going to have to collect at least about 4 to 6 data points to get a good reading on and a good measure of fidelity with that particular practice, to see in that probe that we're doing, that test that we're providing, to be able to determine what level the student is actually functioning on. And so the process for progress monitoring really doesn't change, whether it's being done for RTI or if it's being done on you know, on an annual goal. You're going to select a measure. You're going to keep that measure the same. You're going to create a graph, and that graph and a goal line is going to show you, that aim line is going to show you, is that student trending toward meeting that goal? And then you're going to administer and score and graph those data points consistently within the time that's specified in the annual goal. You know, how frequently should we be doing it? Every other day, a couple times a week, weekly? Are we doing it twice a month? And so we've got to be thinking about our role here is to make sure that we're able to collect the data when we need to collect it, and how it needs to be represented in a graph then, so that it shows us, is the student trending toward reaching that goal? And then, you know, it helps us to communicate that progress to the parent when those times come up. And we do have to report on these goals on the IEP as often as we report on a student's report card for students without disabilities. And so that's certainly an important process, and one where a paraeducator would really play an important role.
I think so too. So we're going to allow you an opportunity to practice with we're going to first look at a fluency measure, and we're going to let you all practice with fluency. So we're going to talk about that, and then we're going to talk about what it looks like, how we collect data for behavior, what it might look like for us to collect data for different kinds of
You have your reading goal.
yeah, and the
there.
reading goal.
Yes.
And so we're going to do, so the rest of this
there's
video
also-
is going to have some examples of what that might look like and how to progress through that. So that's what we're gonna pause right there, and then just let you all have some samples of experience of how we collect data, and we do those data points.
When we think about progress and we think about writing a goal, we write a goal that we always tell our teachers
you've got to write a goal, an IEP goal, that you can measure. So when we talk about that, we're talking about really basically 3 different kinds of data, okay? We're going to count, we're going to time, or we're going to measure how long it takes a student to respond to a prompt, which is we refer to as latency. Okay, sometimes, for example, you got a kid and you're going to measure how many words they can read correctly in a minute. That is a frequency count, okay? And so the State Department just a couple of years ago put into Infinite Campus a goal monitoring tab where the teacher can go in and put the percentage or put the amount of time or how long the time was responding to the prompt. And those are the 3 types of data that you really measure. So when you're looking at if a student is reading, are they reading the words correctly? And we're counting how many words they're reading correctly in a minute. Okay? That's one way of measuring progress. Okay? They're responding to that goal. They're responding to that verb. We have to set up the conditions under which we're going to watch them do that. We're either going to look through the lens of either a direct measure where we're actually sitting there with the student and they're reading. That's the only way to do that. The only way I know to do that. And then you've got indirect measures and you've got curriculum-based measures that we talk a lot about, and then authentic measures, which we rarely talk about. So that's the 4 choices you have, but really, ultimately, everything a student does in that classroom turns into, can I count it? Can I time it? Can I time the amount of latency that's involved in responding to a prompt? We have students that are behavior kids. They have behavior goals because they can't get their work done, they can't organize themselves, or they just have some behavior issues with being around others. They don't know the proper way to act in a small group, those types of things. And sometimes we have to prompt them to get started, right? And so when we prompt them to get started, it may take them longer than we want it to take them to get started and to be engaged like we were engaged in this small group. So we want to either decrease the amount of time that it takes them to get started or respond to that prompt in an appropriate way. So when we are thinking about verbs, we tell our teachers, hey, look, we're going to expect you to use these words. Do I just hold that down? How does that work? Yeah. We're going like knowledge. You're going to ask a student to list, to name, to recall, to record, to relate, to repeat, to state, to tell, and to underline. But then we're going to, when we the idea here with Bloom's taxonomy is that with these verbs, as you move toward this end of the taxonomy, the rigor of the expectation or what the student's action is going to be much greater, okay? So, having a student just list, let's say they're listing the 3 attributes of a butterfly, okay? And you tell them what those 3 attributes are, and then you ask them to list it again, and there you go. They recall it, they list it, that's knowledge level, okay? That's knowledge. Can you recall it? Can you spit it back out? Okay? But then when we ask the student to compare or describe something, or discuss something, like we had you all discussing a topic this morning as far as confidentiality is concerned, we're discussing, we're explaining, we're expressing, identifying, recognizing, restating, telling a story. We're comprehending. What happened in the story? Can you retell it? So we're going to measure, can you retell it, right? We're going to measure, can you list it? We're going to count how many items you get right. We're going to count how many times you can retell the story. We're going to, one of the things we do in school is we give comprehension questions, right? We give questions. How many questions do you get right? What's that percentage? Is it on grade level? Or in special education, it would be probably less than grade level work, right? It would be because there's an achievement gap that we have to concern ourselves with, or else they wouldn't be in special ed, right? And so when we talk about progress monitoring as such, we talk about those three things. We're writing goals that are going to meet the unique needs of the student, and we're also going to make them rigorous. So we don't want to always write goals that stay down here. We want to move up to the apply and analyze and arrange, where we're synthesizing the information, we're asking them to gather information from here and here and here. And so you can see how the rigor of the goal is ramped up in regards to the behaviors that we expect them to see them exhibit. Now, when we go to taking data on that, we are going to do one of those three things. So it's going to be really simple. We're either going to count and turn it into a percentage, turn it into a raw score that we can put into Infinite Campus Goal Monitoring, or we can turn it into something that we're going to time. So okay, so let's say an example of timing something would be, the kid's outstanding behavior, and you're looking at through a direct measure, you're watching him do this. The student is having an outburst or calling out, okay, just verbally disrupting. How long does that last? And what do we do in response to that? So we take down the time that it started, we take down the time that it ended, and that is the duration of the behavior, right? And then we start to provide special design instruction to decrease the negative behavior and put in place a positive behavior. So ultimately, progress monitoring comes down to those three things, okay? So when you're looking at this particular sheet here, it's talking about doing a behavior assessment. This student is they're going to collect data. Educators can determine whether a student's behavior is problematic or warrants intervention. We're looking at the target behavior or the behavior to be changed. And so in an operational definition, a behavior is explicitly or clearly defined such that it is measurable, can be identified by two or more observers, and can be identified across time and in different settings or contexts. These two methods, duration and latency, which we've been talking about, are two that the State Department expects us to be measuring. Okay? How long does the behavior last? How long does it take us to respond to a prompt? If we've given a student, get your pencil out, get your paper out, and here is the question that you're going to be considering today. What does it mean? Whatever the question might be, it could be like we were talking about confidentiality this morning. So your question was there. Now, if I had a group of 4 or 5 and I saw one, they're just doing this, they don't have their paper, they don't have, how long does it take once I go over and give the prompt, you need to get your paper, you need, that direct response, that direct prompt, that direct cue, you need to get your feet under the table, you need to get your pencil up, and you need to read what's on the paper, or let me read it to you, da 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 da. And then, once you give the prompt, you start timing. How long does it take? That's latency. How long does it take them to get started? And you would have to operationally define what appropriate behavior looked like. What are you searching for? So let's go back, Brenda, to the present level goal model. Yeah, go back up to the top there for a second, and let's just look right here. So when we talk about present levels linked to goal monitoring, and we talk about measurable verbs and the methods of measurement and the infinite campus goal monitoring and the analysis of progress, we are looking at certain things here. These are our learning targets for this session today. The first thing is that we're going to, when a kid has an IEP, the first thing we're going to look, when Brenda and I go look at one of your teacher's folders, we're looking to see, is there any percentages associated with those verbs that we showed you, okay, in the present level of the IEP. I don't know how much do you all look at IEPs? Any at all? Or do you just do the accommodations and assist the instruction and take small groups and work with them?
I used to do all the data for all the special ed for the high school for a year there.
Uh-huh. And so you do have some experience with it.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's think about let's go into the present. When you look at the present level, we know that in the present level you got to have certain strengths. And if we're just today, we're just going to talk about academic performance, more or less, and maybe a little bit about the social emotional piece, which is your Vineland score, and the Vineland score basically comes down to functional communication, and it comes down to whether or not you complete tasks and whether or not you can get along and socialize with your peers. And then let's go back up just a little bit, Brenda, just a little bit. Within that present level, you're going to have certain things. You're going to talk about strengths, what the student does well, okay? So you're going to have to know, based on the student's learning profile, one of the things that as an instructional assistant you could be concerned with would be how that student best learns. Do we know what mode they learn best with? Do we know what their disability is? What is it that's causing the adverse effect on their performance? What does the disability tell us? If they have a reading disability, what is it about the reading disability that's causing the problem? Is it that they don't have phonemic awareness? Is it that they can't comprehend after they read? Is it fluency? Is it they have so much trouble with multisyllabic words that by the time they get to the end of the sentence they forgot what the multisyllabic word was and they don't glean any meaning from it? So we have to know what, so many times when I would look at a student's record, I would see maybe an MMD student that has a mild mental disability. They're across the board. They've got problems in math, they've got problems reading, they've got problems in writing, they've got problems with adaptive behavior. But they would always have these things that stuck out, these little outliers. Like some of them could read tons of words, but they couldn't make any sense out of what they were, right? They could read all day long because they had learned, they had the phonemic awareness, but they could not make sense of what they were reading. They couldn't hold it in their long term. Maybe their long-term memory was impacted or whatever. So you really got to try to, for each student, know basically what it is that they learn best in, okay? And how at that particular level that they're working, what are their strengths? Can they, if they can call words, then how do we turn that into something that they can comprehend? That's kind of, we're kind of diagnosing. So we would look at strengths, but we also then look at the problem areas. Like if it's reading comprehension, they can't comprehend, we know that there's a great percentage or a great number of times when they're reading a passage that they can't retell the story. They can't answer the questions, okay? So they're getting a low percentage. So when you're doing progress monitoring, you give them a passage, you would let them read. It may or may not be under a time constraint. Maybe time constraints cause them lots of problems because they're anxiety filled. But you would then look at that and say, oh, okay, so these are the things that they're having problems with. When it comes to a detail, when it comes to an inference, when it comes to making sense out of what they read, they're really struggling. So we've really got to go back and teach and write a goal around gleaning information from the page, making inferences, being able to recall details. Can you get the main idea? I hear that all the time, 5th grade, right? That's where. So, but really, students at the high school level also have those issues, right? They come to you with many reading problems. So, once we determine what the need is, then we have to determine and develop a baseline, okay? And so the way we would develop a baseline, we would take the particular skill and we'd probe it about 5 times, and we would take an average of that score, and that would be the baseline. And that baseline, that percentage on that particular grade level or instructional level that the student is, would be reflected in the present level on the IEP. And when we look at that goal, we say, okay, they're reading and they're going to answer comprehension questions on the 4th grade instructional level. Okay? They're in the 7th grade, but they're working on the 4th grade. We've got to get them astute at the 4th grade before we can get them to the 7th grade, right? So we got to work 4th, 5th, 6th. So we turn it into a baseline, and we then look at that percentage. If that percentage is they can answer 20% of the questions consistently on the 4th grade instructional level, then we're going to do some specially designed instruction with them. We're going to provide them with some practice time with some specially designed instruction, and we're going to take them through this lesson, and we're going to probe them ever so often, and we're going to capture whether or not they're making progress. Are they getting a higher percentage of the questions correct? So let's go to the KVET coaching tool for a second. So right here, we've got one of the tools that we give our teachers is, this is what a present level would look like. And you can see we're talking about strengths and needs. But when we get down here to this baseline part, we have to take the skill, whatever, if it's reading or if it's reading and answering questions, if it's doing math problems, whatever it is, we have to probe that for about 4 or 5 times. And then we have a built-in sheet establishing baseline right here that, click on that, Brenda, see if it'll bring that Google Doc up, right? Yeah. So we have a built-in sheet that teaches you exactly how to do it. And so how to establish a baseline. Which data source will we use? Where will the data come from? And we will look at the last 4 to 6 data points, either to carry over from the last IEP and determine what the baseline is, or if we've got a new probe, and that's what we're going to kind of focus on right here, is there's no data exist, or we don't know what the baseline is on that discrete skill, on that reading comprehension on that particular level. So we would give them 4 or 5 probes, and we would turn it into a percentage, and that would be the percentage that would go into the present level. Okay, Dion.
Okay. So I want to let you guys get a practices, and you probably have done some of these before, but let's say you're progress monitoring, and so you're in the classroom, and you're helping. Are you all have students with disabilities or special ed instructional assistants? Is everybody? So sometimes, you know, like Dan Paul's talking about, like Brenda had shared with us, our responsibility is to check to see where a student is at. We provide them as much instruction and support that we can, and then we check to see how they're doing. And so you all have a real important role in helping that whole process, and we all are together to help move a student forward. And you know how much time you spend with those kids, and you know how much time you are invested with those students, and you know how much that you know how well they do and what they struggle with. So being part of all of us collaborating together and working together and being able to monitor how students are doing, you are with those kids probably most of the day or a lot of the day. You all know them so well that you have such valuable information that if we're all talking about it, well, you'll be able to help pinpoint the exact skills that kids need some help with and those kinds of things. So I don't know if you all done fluency probes before, but what we were talking about, so if a kid's working on comprehension, if they have an IEP goal, and they're working on comprehension, or they're working on fluency, or they're working on basic reading skills or something like that, and same thing for math. If they're working on those skills, you can help with that part about let's just check to see how they're progressing. So we use, probably at your schools, they've used Dibbles before, but we use some kind of, like we can take a reading passage and we can see how well kids are doing. If we read, and over time we see that kids get better and better. So I'm gonna give you a chance to practice what that might look like. And so I'm gonna read a passage and I'm gonna let you all score me on this passage. And so I'm gonna give each one of you this set of sheets. And I'm gonna ask you to just listen and I'll read it, and I'm gonna ask you all to score me. And then you're gonna see kind of how we collect information, like Dean Paul was just talking about. We collect data and we gotta know why. We gotta figure out where the kids are at, and then we're gonna figure out how we can, we see how we can help kids improve. So this one, we used to use Dibbles when I was still over in my classroom teaching, and I use Dibbles all the time to kind of see how kids did with fluency. So that second page of that handout I gave you is, there's an article that says the North American beaver. You all see that? So you might get a passage like this, and this one is for, I think this one is a 5th grade one, and I'm going to check a child's oral reading fluency. What I'm going to do is, if you'll see that column over there on the right, it tells you how many words were in that sentence. So you give them a timed 1 minute time, and you allow them to read a passage, and you're going to check to see how many words they get correct. So if I miss a word, you're going to draw a line, and I'll show you kind of what that might look like. If I'm going to score this, and I have just something to write with, I'm just going to draw, like if I miss this word here, I'm going to just draw a line on that word, because I know that I missed that word. Right? So if I want to read this, and I'm going to give myself a 60-second timer, I'll let Mr. May here push start on my timer, and I'm going to read, and you all are going to listen to see if I make mistakes, and then you're going to mark if I make any mistakes. If I self-correct, you're going to write just a little SC over top of that word that I try to correct. So when he says begin, that's what you would do. You'd tell the kid. So you can see that if you were sitting there with a kid, you could say, okay, let's read this passage. I'll check, see how well you're doing. So I'm going to give you this to let you read. I'm going to give you 1 minute to read, and then we're going to score this together. So Mr. May, when you're ready, I'm going to start reading this article.
Start.
It is rare to see a beaver in the wild in North America. For thing, there are fewer than there were hundreds of years ago. For another, they live in logs hidden from view. Finally, they're most active at night. Beavers have been liked with North America since the earliest days of record history. The first Europes to settle in Canada were fur traders. First, the French and the English bought beaver skins from Native American trippers.
Stop.
Okay, so right there at the end of where I read trappers, just draw a line, and that will tell you how many words that I read in that minute. So I'm gonna let you all look at a count and see how many. And over here it'll tell you, like the line before, I think that if I got down to here I had 74, so I'd have 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82. So I had 82 words. Now, what you're gonna do is go back and count how many of those did I miss? Does Does anybody have any, know how many errors I made, or y'all still counting?
I've got 9 total.
I've got 9.
Did you all have 9 total? So down here at the bottom, you're gonna have the total numbers, words read.
I've got 9 that you missed and
Okay,
one
and then
that you
right
tried
there-
to correct.
Okay, okay. So you just, that would be total number of errors. You put in that line right there. So I had 9, and the total words I read was 82. So I'm gonna subtract 9 from 82. And how many words did I get correct? 73, right? I didn't do the math on that. I trust y'all do the math on that. So I got 73 words correct. So I would have like a score sheet, and that would be this sheet I gave you on the back. And you'd go over there and you'd write that in. So this is month, so this is July. And the first one you would go up here and mark where I got, how many did I get? So you'd have to mark if I only got 73. I'd be a little under 73, right? So I could color it in, I could mark it on this score sheet. You see that very first column where it says month, like month 1? Like month
So
1
this
right
is your
there, yeah.
total
So
words
you just
correct.
figure out where I was at.
So
and
you-
you'd
It's
mark that.
month though.
What month are you in?
We
July.
just start month 1, we'd say we just
Just
start
say,
right here.
just start
Yeah,
with
you could
month
just start
one.
with July,
Okay.
that'd be fine, we'll pretend that was where you, say you started in August.
Okay.
And so you could use this kind of passage no matter what grade you're in. Because these, you can get different ones, and that would be something that the teachers that you work with, and like you all may be working with reading recovery folks, you might be working with Save the Children folks, but they would have those things. But what I would do is I'd go up here and I'd see, let's see, 75, I didn't get 75, so I'm down below it. So I'd make me a
Yeah.
little mark right there, or a dot, or whatever you wanted to put right there. And so then I would read another, so that one would be this week, or maybe I'm checking it a couple times this week. But this one's showing like every week I check to see if I got better. So what I'm going to be doing in the meantime is if I was struggling with some of those words, then I'm going to be working on those words, right? I'm either going to be working on how to pronounce words with vocabulary. I might be working on getting better at reading little short passages. I might be getting better at finding words inside of words to sound them out. So whatever I'm learning should help me get better at reading. And so if I'm in the 5th grade, I should be reading, I don't remember, it's at 4th grade, it's 132 words per minute, correct? So I'm pretty far behind on that 5th grade passage, right? But so when we were talking about how we establish baseline or figure out where kids are at, I took a 5th grade passage, and I might be in the 7th grade, or I might be in the 9th grade. And I could take that passage and I could see how many words I got correct on that grade level. And then you're gonna be able to check to see, right? Every time you all check on Friday and you're helping and we're all, you're running a station, the teacher's running a station, and you're helping getting just kids coming over and reading like that. See, it just took 1 minute to check to see how well I was doing on that, right? So that helps me know what kind of words that I'm missing or what kind of words I'm getting stumbled on. And then you could go back and look where there's certain words that I got stumbled on. So go back and look in that passage where there's certain words. One, what kind were they?
Well, lodges, link, Europeans, you stumbled and you went.
Okay, so I stumbled on a couple different
You did say
words.
something wrong, but you corrected them.
Okay,
Yeah.
so right, so that means if I self-corrected, then I figured out a little
Yeah.
bit way to figure out to correct it. So that's kind of something, a skill that I'm working on. So I'm learning to do that, but I'm still making
If
some
you were going
mistakes.
to convert this to a percentage,
You could,
you would count
the total
the total
number.
number of words in the passage, right?
And then you
And
could say how many you got.
How many you
Yeah.
got correct. So you turn it into percentage, and that percentage would be one data point,
Yeah.
okay?
It'd be either in decimals or percentage, whichever they
Yeah, you
prefer.
could, right.
Yeah.
And when you put them in percents, it helps you kind of keep, like if I got 70% of them, because IEP goals are wrote on percentages. And I'm gonna show you what one of them looks like. I'm gonna use Dean Paul's computer, I'm gonna show you what this looks like when you convert that in to, like if you get a bunch of those and what it looks like when you put it on the data sheet. I'm gonna show y'all what that
Yeah,
looks like. While this talks.
and then two, going back to what we've been talking about this morning, even with our confidentiality piece, we said we put you in a small group and we're gonna have you working, and so we're gonna be checking. So you see the power of this data collection not only tells us, did the kid make progress, which is by law we're supposed to be doing. I mean, we're supposed to be checking progress on the goal, right? As often as we report on report cards. That's what the law says. So the power of this is not only, yes, the kids make progress, but it also informs, like she's talking about, it's informing your what? What you do with the kid, which is your instruction. So the in-between times are what really makes it go, but you've got to check it. You've got to constantly be checking kids to see, are they getting it? Are they understanding it? And that's where progress monitoring is really powerful. Not only does it inform it, yes, they're making progress on the goal, but also, yes, it's going to tell us what we need to teach next, what we need to hit again, what mode's coming into play here, all those things.
But I'm gonna show them in that in a second, but
Can you get it?
I can't right now, I'll have to send it to you from my computer, but I'm, while I get, let them practice on another one, I wanna show them how, another way we can do
Sure,
progress.
sure.
So that kinda makes sense. So when you go, like, there's all kinds of places, there's like some links, and we'll share those with you, but there's links to go get those reading passages. So if you have a few of those that you use, like you can talk with the teacher and you can say, okay, well, I can help with this part, right? And you all can kind of collaborate together and say, you know, if I have some reading passages, I can help you check those on Friday, right? And then you all can see how you score them. It's not very hard. You could do the same thing with the math sheet. Tell me what grade do you work with?
We were in the high school, but we actually have 8th grade.
7th graders.
You got seventh
Eighth
grade and
graders.
eighth graders.
They're gonna be
So
eighth
like
graders.
something like a fluency check or comprehension check is you'd have them read a passage and then you could see how many words they got correct. Or you could have them read a passage and see how many questions they could answer, right? Maybe you gave them 5 questions and you check, see how many did they get right. And so you're gonna check this week and then you're teaching them some work, how to get to do better with comprehension. And then the next week you check them again, and you just give them a little reading passage and let them answer questions. So that's one way you can check comprehension. And so you can see how that we can all work, everybody can work together and help collect that information. And you'll know then if the kids are working on comprehension, then that's some things that you can do with them.
The
And
type
if
of
you
students
are,
we've got, like if they learn like so much one time,
yes,
short term.
that's right.
Come back, they don't, it's like nothing.
They can't remember it, or they have parts of that's part of their disability, and like they don't have that working memory. They can't remember things for a long period of time, and so you'll work really, really hard one day and you think they got it, and then the next day they come back and they forgot what they learned the day before. Same thing like with sight words. You can do the same kind of thing with like we're doing like this with sight words and let them practice sight words. Here's another one, and I'll show you, you could do this one, right? So this one is letter recognition. So this one has 2 sheets to it. And I'll show you this one. This one's for elementary, but you could use that if you wanted to with elementary kids, but you could change it up for older kids. You could do the same kind of activity with like vocabulary words. Here's a sheet like this. So let's say these are 2 sheets. And you were working on with kids on letter recognition. So these are earlier kids, but now you may have some high school kids that don't have that, especially if they're special ed kids, they may be working on letter recognition. But this example here is, you got someone up there, don't you? Okay, great, thank you. But on this letter recognition, see, we can do it a couple different ways. If we're working on a particular letter, you could take this probe, because this is like a little assessment. So this would be like a teacher-made assessment, or a curriculum-based measure, and if you're working on letters. So you could take this sheet and you could check to see if they got their letters, right? So let's just go down here and mark. Let's say they missed the first one, just mark an X on the first one. Say they missed the first one, they got the second one right, they were able to understand A. The third one they missed, the fourth one they missed, but the 5th one they got right. Okay, so out of 5 trials there, or out of 5 different letters, how many did they get right? 2. So you could figure a percentage of that, right? 2 out of 5. So what would that be? That would be a 40%, right? So they got 40%. So that's how you know if they got 40% of the letters. So let's say you worked on letters and you did that and you practiced them and they did them in centers. And then the next Friday you checked. Did they get those letters correct? Did they miss them? And then you would have more letters to move on to for the next one. So as part of those assessments, you can use those to help to see how kids are doing. So you could give them that next week, you could give them this little same test on those letters. Did they get them or did they not? And so let's say the next week they got the letter L correct. So they got 3 out of 5. So then that moves their percent to 60%, right? But we're seeing growth. That means whatever we're doing and help them, they're getting better at it. So it gives them an opportunity for more practice and to learn. So that's how then we can move kids. And that's why it's so important that everybody knows what to work on with the kids and knows kind of how to check to see how they're doing along the way. So sight words, now what grade did you say you do?
I'm actually a clerk.
Okay.
But I've been with kids.
Okay, but it's still.
Start kindergarten.
Yeah, so well, you're gonna be still helping and working with kids in regard, well, that's what our jobs is in school. You know, we may be pulled to help with a small group, or we might be helped with tutors, right? So we all can always contribute and help that way. But let's say you got a high school student. What grade level do you think a lot of those kids read on? They are pretty low, much lower than where they're at, right? Could they read that 5th grade passage I just gave you?
No.
Okay, so.
I have one.
Right, so there's some different things. So high school kids, they might be working on comprehension, right? So you might just give them a little something like that, like I said, to read, and then you check to see how many they got right. So it'll be the same kind of idea here. It's like, say they got 5 questions. Did they get all 5 of them right? Did they only get 4 of them right? Did they get 3 of them correct? Did they get 2 of them correct? And then you could calculate, well, they got a 20% or a 30% or a 40%. You could do the same thing with math. And it can be mixed up math problems. It doesn't have to be, like if they're working on fractions, you could give them 5 fraction problems, and you could check to see how well they're doing. That's how we know if we're helping kids. And so that's what makes the progress monitoring, and that's how your role as being a person to help with that progress monitoring and being in that classroom working directly with those students. You know, you see how important that is and how valuable that
And
is.
sometimes, Dion, not to interrupt, but sometimes it's the important part is knowing where to go to find something that's going to be relevant to a high school student, right? And I think back to my own time as a co-teacher. I worked in a junior level. Everybody had to have government at Pikeville High School, okay? And I was a teacher at that time, and I was co-teaching in that classroom. But one of the things I said, you know, I've got these goals, okay? Yeah, we've got to go over all this stuff about the Constitution and all the stuff about the law and how to make the law and what do we do as a citizen and that kind of thing. But we've also got to find some things to read on their grade level, because we've got a goal that says we need to increase their reading level. So I would find reading passages for them on their grade level, individualized, and it's amazing what Google can do.
Yeah.
Okay, so you Google that, you find that passage, you take that 1 minute check of their fluency or their comprehension. Can they answer questions? I would have them either, if they were working on fluency and we were just looking at getting words right, that was a fluency measure. If it was a comprehension measure, then we would do that. And I would always ask Mrs. Cooley, who was the lead teacher in there, I would say, can you give me 10 minutes to where I can, on Thursday, where I can take these guys to the side, kind of extract them just a little bit, but it's still on topic. It was about government, but it was on their level, and see if we could increase their reading level. And in the meantime, we would give them sometimes passages that were a little more aligned to their particular level. And so very, very important that we allow the data to see, are we getting it? And where do we go from here? And can we put a number on that goal? Because everything links back to that IEP, you know, and we have to be cognizant of our specially designed instruction and how it is providing access to the content, but also working on the skills. And did you have something else? Did you want to say something?
Yeah,
Okay.
and I was gonna-
So I was going to show you here, we've got several examples of different ones in our presentation. This is much like the one you just practiced, where you can see the kids read for a minute and they missed the word dragon, and they even wrote what they said in over top, right? Mm-hmm. And that kind of gives you some diagnostic look at, hey, the kids, they're missing these words that are longer, and we've got some work to do here around some of these. It just gives us tons of information and feedback. So no matter what we're doing in our classes, are we checking to see if the kids get it? Are we frequently, you know, I know at the high school level sometimes it's a little more difficult, but in the natural flow of instruction, we should be checking for understanding. We should be saying, are you getting it? Can I probe you real quick without a grade? You see?
And so that plays into that formative assessment that you would do quite often. And we're going to talk about that later today when we get to the accommodations section and we look at specially designed instruction and exactly some of the things that move the needle for kids. But right now we're just talking about how do we measure, and can we say that the kid's making progress on the goal, and can it inform our instruction? What you're looking for?
I need to refresh this because I just noticed something in this phone.
Okay.
There you go. I wanted to show you guys what an example this would look like in different content areas. Because like what we were just talking about. Okay, right here. Like what Dean was just talking about. How we would graph that data and we keep up with it. So this one is an example
Of latency.
of latency.
Yeah.
And this one is one, so this one is the one we're talking about. I gave you an example, we shared that one about reading, but what does it look like for behavior? I bet all your kids behave all the time and they never get in trouble, right? Right. That's a trick question, right? But so sometimes we have to help with behavior. We kind of are just monitoring behavior, right? It might be how many times they're off task or how many times they show up to class without a pencil, especially for high school students. It's how many times are they unprepared for class, or they're interrupting somebody, or they're poking somebody with a pencil, whatever. So sometimes this one is like, this is how we would record if a kid, like the teacher gave them a prompt and they said, okay, let's get started on our math. How long did it take them to get started? Because what we might be working on with kids is how quick we can get them started on their task, right? So there's all kinds of different things we measure. We measure how they behave, how they get along with others. We measure how they do in reading and math. We measure how they do in writing. So you can see this one's the same kind of thing. This one would be what time the instruction was given. So let's say at 11:11, I said, okay, let's get to work. And then what time did the student actually get to work? Well, that might be, you might write down 11:15. So I'm going to know 4 minutes. It takes 4 minutes every day for this kid to get started. Because, you know, they're probably hunting in their backpack, can't find a pencil, right? Or if you're in math class, they can't find a calculator. So depending on what you're trying to measure, this is a real simple way that you can just progress monitor. So when I was helping with progress monitoring, I would put those like a sheet like that on my clipboard, and I just had it with me, right? And so as I saw those things happen, I could just record the time. I have my watch on, or I'd have a timer, and I could record the time. And at the end of the day, I had all that data to say, oh, okay, I can see where maybe it's certain classes that they're having trouble with, maybe it's certain times of the day. You know, like we'd have kids that were having like ADHD, right? And they'd start out real good in the morning, but it'd kind of wear out by the evening. Well, maybe the medicine was wearing out, right? But those are patterns that we can help recognize because you spend a lot of time with those children. Then you can say, oh, okay, well, I know something's going on after lunch. You know, or they're getting in more trouble after lunch. So this would help you. So if you have just a sheet like that, and like Deepa was talking about, there's just different ways that we record it, but every piece of that data is important. This will help us know how to get kids, you know, if they're taking so much time getting, beginning their task, then maybe they need help with organization. Maybe they need help, you know, to get to class 2 minutes early to get all their stuff out. Maybe they need a checklist to get all of their stuff out on the table. So those are all things that we can help with. And we can prompt kids and remind them, say, don't forget, you know, you need this, this, and this. Or give them a little schedule. So those all help.
And you look here, Dion, this is a great example of how you would figure the baseline. So we've taken 4 latency measures and they're taking an average of it, okay? So you've got a 60, a 90, a 50, and a 35, and you take an average of that. Now that 90 seconds might be what sometimes we would refer to as an outlier, but for this purpose right here, you take those 4 times, and behavior change is a little bit different than teaching reading, okay? Teaching reading or teaching mathematics, we can do a progress check once a week. In this case here, with latency, we might want to see a little bit more change, and we may have to take a little bit more care in the measure. So we would take the data more frequently with behavior change because it's not going to tell us anything if we do that once a week. We're not going to see the trend, right? And so,
Like
go ahead.
With the example that he's talking about, this is every day. We just kind of keep up with each period maybe, and we've got a little checklist. So you may have some students that you work with that, like I said, are behavior that you want to keep up with. So you can just keep that checklist with you, And you have a copy have 5 copies, and every day this week, you've got a copy for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And then you could just write that down. And you're gonna be looking for patterns, because we hope eventually, whatever it is we're doing, if it's that little checklist we've got them, or having materials ready for class, that they're getting better. And if they're not, then we know what we're doing is not working. So this is what it might look like. So we can have that progress monitoring. You can see, though, again, that's so helpful to be able to share with that team of people that work with that student. I'm going to show you a couple more. These are more of those, because this one is something that we would do every day, right? So this is an example of what that might look like. So this would be what we have to put in the IEP. We have to collect those data points, but we also have to analyze why we think we see those behaviors. So if we're working on behavior, we want it to go down. We want to see that kid progress. If it's something on reading or reading fluency, we want to see them go up. So it's a lot of those things that we're looking for. You know, we want to decrease the behavior, but we want to improve academics. And so this is what it would look like. And just for the sake of time, I'm going to move on over to the next one. And I'm going to show you, so like I just gave you that passage just now, and we were talking about checking that to see how well they did for total words read and how many words they got, how many errors they had, and how many words per minute. So let's say every week I checked that. And so I gave them that reading passage, and that came right from that University of Oregon, just like the one I gave you, that 5th grade one. So if we had a bunch of those every week, we check them. And then this is what it's going to look like. So when we start looking at it, so the first time I checked, I'm going to say we've got a baseline, so we know that this kid read about 105 words a minute. So that's where we start at. Then the next data point, I'm going to do it again, right? But my goal here is to get kids to 195, because I know that kid's got to move and it's got to improve. So there's the baseline, and that's where we're aiming toward. So every time that we do a data point, like right, I'm going to do a little reading passage and I'm going to mark it. We're going to do another reading passage, we're going to mark it. Do another reading passage each week, we're going to mark it. And right there, we see that kid's not making any progress, right? So it's better that we're not waiting that whole 6 weeks or that 9 weeks before we do something different with this kid, or before we send them to tier 2 or tier 3, or we're doing some work with RTI, or that we're spending more time in the special ed classroom. We're going to stop right there, and whatever we're doing is not really working. So we need to know that pretty quick. It's better to do it in 3 weeks than it is to wait 9 or 12 weeks and kids are not getting what they need. And so we're going to change it. We're going to do something different, right, with reading. So we're going to start working on chunking, because that's what you're talking about just a minute ago, chunking pieces of information. So we're going to change how we work with kids, and we're only going to give them maybe a paragraph at a time, right? We're going to stop and we're going to say, let's look at this one paragraph, let's read all of this, and then we'll decide, you know, if we're ready to go on or if we still have questions, right? And you practice with them on that. And then look what happens. You start seeing kids do better. So if you don't have this collection of that progress, you're not going to know. You're not going to know how well they're doing. And you can use those same kind of things. And then eventually you can use this whole thing. And what we're writing up here is, okay, we know kids weren't doing so well. So we had to change what we were doing with the kids. And then when we changed, they started improving. And that's a fantastic piece of information that you can use in an ARC meeting, that you can share with teachers, that you all can share together and say, okay, we know that this is working with kids. And so I just want to share that one for you. And then let me show you here one on the math one. So this is an elementary math. Is it okay if I just got a couple more minutes on the through? But here's one, like this one, they gave them 10 math problems and let them solve it. So you could do this with algebra problems, you could do this with multiplication, addition, subtraction, you could do this with geometry, whatever area, but they could have 10 questions, and each week they answer those questions, and then you score it, you check their score. So again, that's about that progress marker. And so it does the exact same thing. So the goal is that we have those points, we have those data points, and we put those data points in, and we look to see, is the kid increasing or is the student decreasing? And then that's how we know if it's working or not.